As I mentioned in yesterday's video, I do expect the 2019 NHL offseason to be incredibly busy with lots of big contracts needed to be handed out. I expect lots of trades, lots of transactions, lots of activity overall. And yesterday we took a look at the top pending unrestricted free agents who need new contracts for the upcoming season. Today I want to take a look at some of the top restricted free agents. There's all kinds of young players who have quickly developed into superstars and are going to be cashing in this summer. Plus, could this summer be the return of the offer sheet? We'll discuss all that coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top, today I'm going to take a look at the top 15 restricted free agents who are needing new contracts after this season. Like the 2019 NHL offseason should be incredibly busy, and we're going to be seeing some very young NHL superstars looking to cash in big time after their big time performances here between this year and the past couple seasons as they complete their entry-level contracts. And some of these RFAs are on their second or third contracts as well, as they've done shorter term deals as well. There's no real order to today's rankings here. Obviously, I found it to be easier to kind of go by teams, as there's a couple of teams that are really going to dominate the top names in the RFA market this summer. So let's just go in here one player at a time. Let's get started with the Philadelphia Flyers and one of their top defensemen, Ivan Provorov. Now, Provorov's numbers are down a little bit this season, but last year, things were really looking up in his sophomore season in Philadelphia. He certainly put up lots of goals, lots of points, and was quickly becoming one of the top young defensemen in the NHL. He certainly has had some setbacks this year. His offensive numbers are certainly down a little bit. His defensive numbers aren't as great either. So it will be interesting to see what kind of contract Provorov and the Flyers work out. I think more than likely he gets a bridge contract and another opportunity to kind of reprove himself here. If this season would have gone better, I think the odds of getting the longer term deal would have been greater, but the Flyers are slowly becoming one of the top young decors in the NHL. I do think in the next couple of years, they certainly have that potential. Between guys like Provorov, Gostisbehere, they get Sanheim. Myers is looking pretty solid in his NHL early goings here as well. I do think longer term, the Flyers are in great shape that way. And locking up Provorov longer term certainly will be a priority, but it might make more sense between the team and the player to do a bridge contract here in this case and kind of let him reprove himself after a bit of a down season. Next up, we got Brock Boeser of the Vancouver Canucks. Now, Brock Boeser has been a tremendous asset here for the Canucks in his young career so far. The Canucks have really assembled a pretty solid-looking group of young forwards that are all going to be long-term superstars by the looks of it here. Boeser being one of the top goal scorers. He put up 29 goals last year. He's got over 100 points in his young career. The only real concern with Boeser so far has been his ability to stay healthy and stay in the lineup on a consistent basis. So far in his first few years in the NHL, he has had his fair share of injuries, and that certainly will be factored in here, but the young man can score at an incredible rate, and I think probably in his case as well, a bridge deal might be best just for his long-term financial goals here. I mean, personally, he could probably get the long-term deal from the Canucks. So from their perspective, it might be better to lock him up now before he really explodes into a consistent 40-plus goal scorer, which I think he can become. But at the same time, from the player's perspective, it might be better off to do a bridge deal and kind of continue to prove himself, stay healthy, and really accelerate his numbers here before locking things up longer term. Next up, we get defenseman Charlie McAvoy of the Boston Bruins, who's put up over 50 points in his first 100 games. He's quickly become a big-time member of the Boston Bruins decor, often playing 20, 21-plus minutes per night. And with the possibility that Zdeno Chara may not return next year, there's not quite clear exactly what his plans are for next season as of yet. I mean, Chara wouldn't be shocking if he did return, but obviously being the captain and logging a lot of minutes and being a big-time member of that decor, McAvoy is kind of like the heir apparent to kind of be the leader of that defense group, and he's certainly in a position here to get a pretty decent contract from the Bruins as well. Again, like Brock Boeser's had some injuries in his young career, that certainly might be a little bit of a concern moving forward as well. But I do think Charlie McAvoy is certainly going to be interesting to see what kind of contract he gets from the Bruins, and whether he goes long-term or a bridge deal. I think either way, there's pros and cons to each one here. Next up, we have another solid young defenseman, and that's Zach Werenski of the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, the Blue Jackets are another team who has a pretty solid young defense core with many guys here in the top four on their blue line having pretty solid seasons, and they're all relatively young. Werenski, often playing top pair minutes with Seth Jones, has put together a pretty solid 3 seasons so far in the NHL. He's on the verge of completing his entry-level contract and going into contract number 2, and I do think there's a pretty good chance that they might go long-term with Werenski. Again, a lot of these guys, bridge deals often make sense, but at the same time, he might be the type of player that might be able to lock up longer term and get on a very cost-affordable, team-friendly contract. I do think that's quite a possibility, so it'll be interesting to see here. But Werenski's certainly one of the brighter young defensemen in the NHL. He's certainly going to be getting a nice raise, regardless if it goes short-term or long with the Blue Jackets. Next up, we have Calgary Flames forward Matthew Tkachuk. Now, Matthew Tkachuk has really exploded this season and really improving on many of his career highs and most point totals. He has cooled a bit lately. He's starting to pick things up. Back up here again, but he's probably on pace to get around 80 points. Likely going to hit the 30-goal plateau. Not a guarantee, but certainly on pace to do so, which is certainly a great time for him to be hitting career highs and all these totals as his entry-level contract comes to a close, and he's looking for that next longer-term contract. Again, like a lot of these guys coming into their ELCs, it's hard to say what the right approach is here, but I'm sure Tkachuk's going to be looking for a fairly substantial raise. Matthew Tkachuk's emergence and development this year and taking it another step forward is certainly another big reason why Calgary Flames has certainly progressed in being the first place in their division this season. I mean, he's not the only one to have that type of year, but he's certainly been a big part of that. Next up, we got William Karlsson of the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, of course, going into last year, Vegas had a lot of guys who were unproven, and Karlsson was certainly the poster boy for that after, really hardly posting any offensive numbers at all during his time in Columbus and briefly in Anaheim before that. Karlsson really exploded onto the scene last year and put up 43 goals, earning the nickname Wild Bill Karlsson, the Swedish gunslinger, as our friend Louis from Vegas Golden Knights coverage likes to call him. But this year, he's born more like Mild Bill. He's on pace for about 23 goals, based on the fact that they acquired him through the expansion draft, and based on where he was before he went to Vegas, even being a solid 20 to 25 goal guy, playing center ice, being good on a penalty kill, etc., putting up, 60, 70 points is still pretty solid. And really, at the end of the day here, he may not be that consistent 40-goal guy. Last year very well might prove to be career highs for him, like some of the other guys that he plays with as well, like Riley Smith might be a good example of that. But either way, they're still being solid performances for Vegas. They're still contributing in key ways. The contract that Vegas gave him last year was kind of a prove-it-to-me kind of contract, and so if you can keep that up, then we'll commit to you longer term with bigger money. But also, since that contract's been in place, they brought in some other bigger-name players like Pacioretty, like Stone, and given them pretty sizable contracts as well. So that's certainly going to eat away at their cap space. So hard to say exactly where Karlsson goes, but I think Vegas at this point likely will go longer term with him this time around, but it might not be quite as high as he may have been hoping after the 43-goal campaign. Next up, we have Mikko Rantanen of the Colorado Avalanche. A very interesting case. He led the league for quite a while this season in the top of the point totals, but it's certainly cooled off as of late. His teammate Nathan MacKinnon has caught back up to him here, but he's still having a fantastic season. He should still come close to the 100-point total, depending on how much production he can put up between now and the end of the season. He's got over 80 points now, so to be at 100 points or very, very close is certainly very reasonable. After hitting 80 points last year, Rantanen is still putting up some pretty solid numbers. There was some talk before earlier in the years. Really, he was on pace at one point for 120 points. Could he end up being a $10 million player? But I think that that number is probably not quite reasonable for him as of yet. Rantanen's certainly going to get a sizable raise. The fact that he's had two really solid seasons now, and even his first year wasn't too bad either. I do think that it makes sense for them to try to go long-term for him before his point totals really escalate and they end up having to pay him even more here in the short term. Next up as well as we have Braden Point of the Tampa Bay Lightning, who's really becoming one of the league's top players along with some of these other guys that we've talked about. Braden Point really is a player who can do it all. He's got incredible speed, going to end up scoring 30-plus goals here yet again. He's currently on pace where he could probably even hit 40 goals and 90 points or more this year, depending on how he finishes out the season. But Braden Point has certainly earned himself a fairly sizable contract, considering that Kucherov's contract with Tampa kicks in next season at $9.5 million. That, based on how he's playing as well, that might even seem to be a bargain longer term, depending if he can keep that up. But Kucherov's breaking records right now as well. Point totals we hadn't seen in many, many years. But Braden Point is also proven to probably arguably be their next best player outside of Kucherov, and is certainly going to be earning a contract that's certainly relatively close, I think, to what Kucherov is earning. At this point, I would probably try to go long-term with Braden Point. After the back-to-back seasons, he's really produced the numbers and really continues to evolve and continues to grow. And I do think that his potential might not even be fully reached yet. It'd be wise to lock him up while they can, if they're able to, before they end up having to pay him even more. But the player may prefer something shorter term. But either way, we'll see what Tampa works out here. With Point, they've been very well at managing their cap and keeping the band together. So I'm quite interested to see how they go about handling this situation. Next up, the Carolina Hurricanes, we have Sebastian Aho, who's arguably their top player, putting up some fantastic numbers, looking to be around probably 85 to 90 points by the time the season is over. And he's done all this too while playing center, where he started his career as a winger. So Sebastian Aho has really proved to be an incredibly valuable member of that Carolina Hurricanes franchise, and certainly continues to help them evolve, and is a huge part of the reason why they currently sit in a playoff spot right now, and I do think that the odds are good of them getting into the playoffs here as well. So I know that they recently locked up his line mate, Teuvo Teravainen, a more reasonable contract in the $5 million range. So we'll certainly see where Aho sits. I mean, I know at one point the owner of the Carolina Hurricanes seemed to be kind of, a little bit skeptical of paying too much for some of these players, but really Aho has proved it. He's earned it, and I do think that they're wise here to try to lock him up longer term if they can, because again, like some of these other guys, I don't think he's seen his full potential here as of yet, and he's certainly putting up some fantastic numbers. If he continues to grow on that and continues to evolve, then they're just going to end up paying him that much more here in a few years' time. Now, all the remaining players are from two teams, two of Canada's top teams here in the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Winnipeg Jets. So let's take a look. They each have three players that are going to have very interesting contract situations. In the case of the Toronto Maple Leafs, we do have one that's going to be much higher than the others, and we'll get started with them. And let's get started here with Mitch Marner. Obviously, Marner's contract is not yet done. They've made it clear they want to wait till the end of the season. It was abundantly clear from the beginning of the season that he wanted the Matthews contract to be completed first, which is now in place. Obviously, they ended up doing a 5-year deal. I do think a lot of reasons here makes a good sense for the team, possibly even for the player as well, to do maybe a 3-year contract, somewhere around that $10 million range or a little bit better. With John Tavares earning over $11 million and Matthews set to make even more, I do think it makes sense really for Marner's case that he really deserves as much as them, in my opinion, based on his play. He's been just as valuable to the team. But at the same time, might make sense to go shorter term here, help the team salary cap situation, keep them everything together as they can, and then cash in here in a couple of years' time. Obviously, the Leafs are not going to want to have as many of these contracts up at the same time again here in a couple of years' time, so they're going to want to stagger things here a bit. So they're not going to want the same type of term for Marner as they did for Tavares or for Matthews. That only makes a lot of sense from the team's business perspective. So we'll see what happens here. Personally, I think Marner's really going to cash in big time. He deserves pretty close, I think, to what Matthews and Tavares are making, and it'd be interesting to see how the Leafs handle it. But again, he's not the only contract situation that they have to deal with here. They've also got Kasperi Kapanen, who's really had a bit of a breakout season as well, especially early on during the absence of William Nylander during his contract holdout. Kapanen played a lot with Matthews and was scoring at an incredible rate. He's going to have 20-plus goals for sure and certainly provide, a lot of secondary scoring depth. They've also got Andreas Johnsson. Johnsson has been playing a lot in the top 6 lately as well, and he's also putting up some pretty fantastic numbers, in that situation too. And he's going to end up with 20-plus goals. Now, Kapanen and Johnsson won't get nearly the money that Marner has, but like I said in the opening here, could this be the year of the offer sheet? I think teams like Toronto and the other team we're going to talk about momentarily, the Winnipeg Jets, are the most susceptible to this. And it may not be your big-time players that you see the offer sheets go after here, but we'll get into that here in just a minute. Now, jumping over to the remaining RFAs, let's look at the Winnipeg Jets. The big one being goal scorer Patrik Laine, obviously drafted number 2 overall a few years ago behind Austin Matthews. He's already got, a 35-plus goals campaign, a 40-goal campaign. He's certainly died down a little bit this year, but he's picking it back up and should be able to finish, over 30, probably in, high 30s is where I'm predicting he'll likely finish. Somewhere around the 40-goal plateau again. So he's certainly due for a big raise himself. And his teammate Kyle Connor, who's going to likely put back-to-back 30-goal seasons together and certainly big point totals, has been a huge part of the Winnipeg Jets' top 6. They have drafted and developed so well, like the Toronto Maple Leafs, that they've kind of put themselves in a bit of a salary cap pickle here. They have a lot of tough decisions to make, and it's not just them. They've also got defenseman Jacob Trouba, who has been proving to be incredibly valuable as of late. Not that he hasn't been valuable before, but his worth has certainly been extremely abundantly clear lately, with guys like Morrissey and Bufflin being out injured. I've seen him playing 27, 28 minutes a night in some cases. He's putting up career numbers in most offensive and defensive categories. Trouba has certainly been proven that he's really taken a major step forward in his game. Now, the Jets and Trouba have had a hard time coming to terms before on a long-term contract. Could this be the year that actually happens, that they actually commit to him longer term? Maybe we'll see a guy like Tyler Myers be the odd man out. or could we see Jacob Trouba maybe, end up being traded? It's hard to say what's going to happen with Trouba, but he's certainly proven that he's worthy of a longer-term contract and a fairly, decent raise over what he's earning today. So the Jets and the Leafs have some incredibly big names they need to look after and some tough decisions to make. Could those two teams become possible victims of the offer sheets? I mean, there's certainly many of the guys I mentioned here today could certainly, entertain an offer sheet. If that comes to be with all the chatter around offer sheets, there's certainly a few teams I think that would be most likely to be the ones trying to sign players through that method. Mostly being the New Jersey Devils, I think would be a big one. They've got all kinds of cap space. There's been lots of mention that it could be a team to watch in that regard. A team like Ottawa, with all the salary that they've shed, with all the trades they've made, they very well might have a hard time coming to the salary floor. So they're going to have to take on some bigger contracts in some capacity. So either they make trades and take on, maybe a bad contract for a more established player and try to get some younger assets with it, or maybe they go the offer sheet route. I know it's Ken Holland from Detroit has been interviewed saying that they wouldn't be opposed to looking at that either, but at the same time, Detroit's salary cap situation is going to prove a little bit more challenging to do that, depending on what other moves he makes. I mean, I wouldn't rule out the Arizona Coyotes as well. They're certainly, known for thinking outside the box, and John Chayka done, a pretty decent job there as well. So we'll see what happens, but I really do think this is quite a possibility, more than ever before. This could be the year we see the offer sheet return. Now, whether or not the players actually sign them, accept them, and put their teams in an awkward predicament remains to be seen. But if they do happen, I don't think they're likely going to be on the biggest name players. I don't think you're necessarily going to see a player like a Mitch Marner or Mikko Rantanen receive that offer sheet, because the amount of money they're going to command, in order for them to sign, the team would have to be giving up 3 and 4 first-round picks or multiple picks. It's just going to be way too big of a price tag. So I think you're looking at more your lower and mid-level RFAs that are more likely, more susceptible to this, that they might be able to get away with here. Maybe giving up 1 first-round pick, or a first and a second, or something a little bit more reasonable. Those are the ones that the teams will be probably more willing to walk away from. Like, for example, let's say that the Maple Leafs have Marner, Kapanen, and Johnsson. They have to get Marner done to a bigger contract, and depending on what that number works out to be, they get too big of an offer sheet, say on Kapanen or Johnsson, and they sign it, they might have to let that player go. But I think that's, like I said, that's more reasonable to think based on what the compensation would be, that teams would go that route. But let me know down in the comments section, what kind of contracts do you think some of these guys are going to command? And could this be the year we see the offer sheet come back? I know oftentimes in the media you keep hearing the Toronto Maple Leafs being victims of the offer sheet. And, not to say that they couldn't be, but there's plenty of other teams, including the Winnipeg Jets, who very well could be in the same predicament. So let me know which teams you think are the most likely to have players in that category who could receive them, and how do you think they'll be handled from there? If you're new to the channel here, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you do, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up before you go. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We will catch you next time.